Sorry. I was termites. Let's see.
By R.L. Stein. Chapter 10. Ignoring the panic that nearly froze me, I kicked and thrashed with all my strength. Stop it! Stop kicking me! A voice screamed. The mermaid? Hey! I cried out angrily as Sheena's head appeared beside me. She pulled up her snorkeling mask. I didn't scratch you that hard, she snapped. You don't have to go crazy. What are you doing here? I cried. What are you doing here? She demanded nastily. You know Dr. D told us not to swim here. Then you shouldn't be here, should you? I shouted. I knew you were up to something, so I followed you, Sheena replied, adjusting her mask. I'm not up to anything, I lied. I'm just snorkeling. Sure, Billy. You're just snorkeling at 6:30 in the morning exactly where you're not supposed to. And where you burned your foot on that fire coral yesterday. You're either up to something or you're totally crazy. She squinted at me, waiting for a response. What a choice. I was either up to something or crazy? What should I admit to? If I admitted that I was up to something, I'd have to tell her about the mermaid, and I couldn't do that. Okay, I said with a casual shrug. I guess I'm crazy. Well, big news, she muttered sarcastically. Come on back to the boat, Billy, said Sheena. Dr. D will be looking for us. You go back. I'll be there in a little while. Billy, said Sheena, Dr. D is going to be very mad. He's probably ready to hop in the dinghy and search for us right now. I was about to give up and go with her. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a big splash on the other side of the reef. The mermaid, I thought. That's got to be her. If I don't go look for her now, I might miss her. I turned away from Sheena and started swimming very fast, straight for the reef. I could hear Sheena screaming, Billy, come back, Billy! I thought I heard an extra note of panic in her voice, but I ignored it. Just Sheena trying to scare me again, I thought. Billy, she screamed again. Billy! I kept on swimming. No way I was going to stop now. But as it turned out, I should have listened to her. Chapter 11. Swimming fast, I raised my head, searching for a good place to swim safely over the fire coral. I saw another splash across the lagoon, near the shore. That's got to be the mermaid, I thought excitedly. I stared hard, trying to catch a glimpse of her. I thought I saw some kind of fin. I made my way past the reef into the deep, still waters of the lagoon. Fogged. Rats, I thought. What a time for my mask to start leaking. I came up for air and pulled off the mask. I hoped I wouldn't lose sight of the mermaid because of this. I wiped the water from my eyes and, leaving the mask wrapped around my wrist, stared toward the lagoon. That's when I saw it, a few hundred yards away, not the green fishtail of a mermaid. The fin I saw was a gray-white triangle, sticking straight up in the water. The fin of a hammerhead shark. As I stared in horror, the fin turned in the water and then ripped toward me, moving steady and straight as a torpedo. Chapter 12. Where was Sheena? Was she still behind me? I glanced back. I could see her in the distance, splashing back to the boat. I was forced to forget about Sheena as the gray fin swiftly moved closer. I thrashed my arms in the water, trying to swim away. When the shark swam right past me, I stopped thrashing. Would it go away? Would it leave me alone? My heart in my throat, I started swimming in the other direction, toward the reef, away from the shark. I kept my eyes on that fin. It began to turn. The shark's fin streamed toward me in a wide arc. Oh, I let out a terrified groan as I realized it was circling me. Now I didn't know which way to go. The shark swam between me and the boat. If I could turn around and climb onto the reef, maybe I would be safe. The huge fin slid closer. I plunged toward the reef. I knew I had to distance myself between me and the shark. Suddenly, the fin shot up in front of me, between me and the reef. The shark kept circling, closing in, swimming faster and faster, making a circle smaller as he swam. I was trapped, but I couldn't stay still. I couldn't just float there, waiting for the shark to eat me. I had to fight. I kicked my legs in a panic as I swam toward the reef. I was nearer to the reef now, but the shark's circles grew smaller, smaller. I breathed in quick, shallow gasps. I couldn't think clearly. I was too terrified. The same two words echoed in my brain. The shark. The shark. Over and over again. The shark. The shark. The shark swam around me in a tight circle. His tail swished, sending up waves of water over me. The shark. The shark. I stared at the monster in wide-eyed horror. He swam so close I could see him clearly. He was big, at least 10 feet long. His head was wide and hideous, long like the head of a hammer, with an eye on each end. I heard my voice quivering. No, no. Something cold brushed my leg. The shark. The shark. My stomach lurched. I threw my head back and let out a howl of sheer terror. Ah! Pain jolted down my spine. The shark had bumped me with its snout. My body rose out of the water, then hit the surface with a smack. I froze. The shark was hungry. It wanted to fight. It circled me again, then zoomed straight for me. Its jaws opened. I saw rows and rows of sharp teeth. I screamed at a hoarse, "No!" I thrashed, panicked. I kicked with all my strength. The razor teeth brushed by, just missing my leg. The reef. I had to get to the reef. It was my only chance. I dove for the coral. The shark plunged toward me. I dodged it once more. I grabbed the red coral. Pain shot through my hand. The fire coral. I didn't care. The top of the reef sat just above the surface of the water. I tried to pull myself up. My whole body stung. I had almost made it. Soon I'd be safe. With a mighty kick, I hoisted myself onto the reef and was yanked back into the water. My stomach slammed against the side of the reef. I felt a sharp stab of pain in my leg. I tried to pull my leg away. I couldn't. I was caught in the jaws of the shark. My mind screamed with terror. The shark. The shark. It's got me. Deep Trouble by R.L. Stein. Chapter 13. My entire body burned with pain. I slipped heavily into the water. The shark knew he had me. I had no strength left to fight. Then something splashed nearby. The shark released my leg and jerked toward the splash. I had no time to catch my breath. The shark circled back. It charged at me. The gaping jaws moved in for the kill. I shut my eyes and let out a shrill scream of terror. A second passed. Then another. Nothing happened. I heard a loud thump. I opened my eyes. Something had come between me and the shark a few feet in front of me. I stared. The water churned white. A long, shiny green fishtail rose out of the water and splashed back down. Another fish was fighting the shark. The shark rolled over, then attacked. The green fishtail smacked the shark hard. The shark went under. I couldn't see what was happening. The water rocked higher, tossing up frothy white waves. All around me, the water bubbled and churned white with foam. Over the crash of the water, I heard shrill animal squeals. Sharks don't squeal, do they? I thought. What is making that sound? The shark surfaced. The long green fishtail rose out of the water and smacked the fish shark hard, a direct hit on its broad hammerhead. The shark shut its jaws and sank below the surface. Then I heard a loud boom. The water stopped churning. A second later, the huge gray fins surfaced a few yards away, speeding off in the other direction. The shark was swimming away. I stared at the green fishtail as it arced over the dark swelling water. As the waters calmed, I heard a low musical sound. It was beautiful and slightly sad, whistling and humming at the same time. It sounded something like a whale, but this creature was much smaller than a whale. The green tail swung around. Then the creature lifted its head, a head with long blonde hair. The mermaid. Chapter 14. Bobbing in the water, I forgot my burning pain as I gaped at her. To my amazement, the mermaid looked just as the zoo people had said she would. Her head and shoulders were smaller than mine, but her flashing green tail stretched out, long and powerful. Her wide sea-green eyes sparkled. Her skin gave off a pale pink glow. I stared at her, unable to speak. She's real, I thought, and she's so beautiful. At last I found my voice. You saved me, I stammered. You saved my life. Thank you. She shyly lowered her eyes and cooed at me through shell-pink lips. What was she trying to say? What can I do in return, I asked her. I'll do anything I can. She smiled and uttered that haunting low hum. She was trying to talk to me. I wished I could understand her. She reached for my hand and examined it, frowning over the red burns from the fire quarrel. Her hand felt cool. She passed it over the palm of my hand, and the pain from the burns began to fade away. Wow, I exclaimed. It must have sounded pretty stupid, but I didn't know what else to say. Her touch was like magic. When she held my hand, I could float without treading water, just as she did. Was this another dream? I closed my eyes and opened them again. I was still floating in the sea, staring at a blonde-haired mermaid. No, not a dream. She smiled again and shook her head, making these low singing sounds. I could hardly believe that only a few minutes before I'd been frantically fighting off a hungry shark. I raised my head and searched the waters. The shark had vanished. The water had calmed, shimmering like gold now under the morning sunlight. And there I was, floating in the sea off a deserted island with a real mermaid. Sheena will never believe this, I thought. Not in a million years. Suddenly, the mermaid flipped her tail and disappeared under the water. Startled, I searched around for her. She had left without a trace. Not a ripple. Not a bubble. Where did she go, I wondered. Is she gone just like that? Will I never see her again? I rubbed my eyes and looked for her again. No sign of her. A few fish darted past me. She had disappeared so instantly, I began to think I had dreamed her up after all. Just then I felt a tiny pinch on my foot. Ouch! I yelled, quickly pulling away. I began to panic. The shark was back. Then behind me I heard a small splash and a whistle-like giggle. I turned around. The mermaid smiled mischievously at me. She snapped her fingers in a pinching motion. It was you, I cried, laughing with relief. You're worse than my little sister. She whistled again and slapped her tail against the surface of the water. Suddenly, a dark shadow fell across her face. I raised my eyes to see what it was. Too late. A heavy net dropped over us. Startled, I thrashed my arms and legs, but that only tangled them more in the rope. The net tightened over both of us. We were thrown together. We struggled helplessly as the net jerked us up. The mermaid's eyes widened as she squealed in terror. Eee! She cried. We were being pulled up out of the water. Eee! The mermaid's frightened wail rose like a siren, drowning out my feeble cries for help. Chapter 15. Billy, I don't believe it. I gazed up through the holes in the net and recognized Dr. D and Sheena. They struggled to pull us aboard the dinghy. Sheena stared down at me and the mermaid in amazement. Dr. D's eyes were wide and his mouth hung open. You found her, Billy, he said. You've actually found the mermaid. Just get me out of this net, I cried. Somehow I didn't feel so great about capturing the mermaid anymore. The zoo people were right, Dr. D muttered to himself. It's unbelievable. It's astounding. It's historic. We landed in a heap on the floor of the dinghy. The mermaid squirmed beside me in the net, making sharp, angry clicking noises. Dr. D watched her closely. He touched her tail. The mermaid flapped it hard against the bottom of the boat. Is there any way this could be a hoax? He wondered aloud. Billy, is this one of your dumb tricks? Sheena demanded suspiciously. It's not a trick, I said. Now will you get me out of this net? The ropes are digging into my skin. They ignored me. Sheena gently reached one finger through the net and touched the scales on the mermaid's tail. I can't believe it, she murmured. She's really real. Of course she's real, I cried. We're both real and we're both very uncomfortable. Well, it's hard to believe anything you say, Sheena snapped. After all, you've been talking about sea monsters ever since we got here. I did see a sea monster, I cried. Quiet, kids, said Dr. D. Let's get our discovery back to the sea lab. He started the dinghy's motor and we roared back to the big boat. Alexander stood on deck, waiting for us. It's really true, he cried excitedly. It's really a mermaid. Sheena tied the dinghy to the side of the Cassandra, while Dr. D and Alexander hoisted me and the mermaid aboard. Dr. D opened the net and helped me out. The mermaid flapped her tail and got herself even more tangled in the net. Alexander shook my hand. I'm proud of you, Billy. How did you do it? This is amazing. He gave me a vigorous pat on the back. Do you realize this is the greatest ocean find of the century? Maybe of all time. Thanks, I said, but I didn't do anything. I didn't find her. She found me. The mermaid flapped violently on deck. Her squeals became higher pitched, more frantic. Alexander's face fell. We've got to do something for her, he said urgently. Dr. D, you've got to let her go, I said. She needs to be in the water. I'll fill the big tank with seawater, Dr. D, said Alexander. He hurried off to fill the tank. We can't let her go just yet, Billy, said Dr. D, not without examining her first. His eyes were shining with excitement, but he saw how upset I was. We won't hurt her, Billy. She'll be all right. His eyes dropped to my leg and he frowned. He kneeled down to look at it. You're bleeding, Billy, he said. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said, but the mermaid isn't. He ignored me. How did this happen? Asked Dr. D. A shark grabbed my leg, I told him. Just as he was about to clamp down, the mermaid came. She saved my life. You should have seen her fighting that shark. Dr. D turned to the mermaid as if seeing her for the first time. Wow, said Sheena. She fought off a shark? All by herself? The mermaid's long green tail pounded angrily on the deck of the boat. Ee! Ee! She cried shrilly. She almost sounded as if she were screaming. Forget about my leg, I shouted. You've got to let the mermaid go. Dr. D stood up, shaking his head. Billy, I'm a scientist. This mermaid is an extremely important discovery. If I let her go, I'd be letting down the entire scientific community. I'd be letting down the entire world. You just want the $1 million, I muttered. I knew it was cruel, but I couldn't stop myself. I hated seeing the mermaid so unhappy. Dr. D looked hurt. That's not fair, Billy, he said. I think you know me better than that. I avoided his gaze. Lowering my head, I pretended to examine the cut on my leg. It wasn't very deep. Alexander had given me some gauze. I pressed it against the cut. I only want the money to continue my research, Dr. D went on. I would never use this mermaid to get rich. That was true. I knew Dr. D didn't care about the money for himself. All he wanted was to keep studying fish. Just think about it, Billy. You found a mermaid. A creature we all thought didn't exist. We can't just let her go. We've got to find out a little bit about her, he said excitedly. I said nothing. We won't hurt her, Billy, I promise. Alexander returned. The tank is ready, Dr. D. Thanks. Dr. D followed him to the other side of the boat. I glanced at Sheena to see whose side she was on. Did she want to keep the mermaid or let her go? But Sheena just stood there watching. Her face was tense. I could tell she wasn't sure which of us was right. But when I looked at the mermaid, I knew I was right. She had finally stopped squirming and flipping her tail. Now she lay still on the deck, the net draped over her. She was breathing hard and staring out at the ocean with watery, sad eyes. I wished I'd never tried to find her in the first place. Now all I wanted was to find some way to help her get back to her home. Dr. D and Alexander came back. They lifted the mermaid inside the net. Alexander lifted her tail and Dr. D held her head. Don't squirm, little mermaid, Dr. D said in a soothing voice. Keep still. The mermaid seemed to understand. She didn't flop around, but her eyes rolled wildly and she uttered low moans. Dr. D and Alexander carried her to the giant glass tank. It stood on the deck now, full of fresh seawater. They gently dropped her into the tank, pulling the net away as she slid into the water. Then they put a screen top over the tank and clamped it shut. The mermaid churned the water with her tail. Then gradually, her tail stopped moving. She grew still. Her body slumped lifelessly to the bottom of the tank. She didn't move or breathe. No! An angry cry escaped my lips. She's dead! She's dead! We killed her! Deep Trouble by R.L. Stein. Sheena had moved to the other side of the tank. Billy, look! She called to me. I hurried around to her. The mermaid isn't dead, Sheena reported, pointing. Look, she's crying or something. My sister was right. The mermaid had slumped to the bottom of the tank and had buried her face in her hands. Now what do we do? I asked. No one answered. We have to find a method of feeding her, my uncle said, rubbing his chin, his eyes on the tank. Do you think she eats like a person or a fish? I asked. If only she could tell us, said Alexander. She can't talk, can she, Billy? I don't think so, I said. She just makes sounds, whistles, and clicks and hums. I'll go down to the lab and get some equipment ready, said Alexander. Maybe we can find out something about her with the sonar monitor. Good idea, said Dr. D thoughtfully. Alexander hurried below. I think I'd better go to Santa Anita for some supplies, said Dr. D. Santa Anita was the nearest inhabited island. I'll buy lots of different kinds of foods. We can try them out on her until we find something she likes. Would you two like anything while I'm there? How about some peanut butter? Sheena asked quickly. There's no way Alexander can ruin a peanut butter sandwich. Dr. D nodded as he climbed into the dinghy. Peanut butter it is. Anything else, Billy? I shook my head. All right, Dr. D said. I'll be back in a few hours. He started the motor and the dinghy sped off towards Santa Anita. It's so hot, Sheena complained. I'm going to go down to my cabin for a while. Okay, I said, my eyes on the mermaid. It was hot up on deck. There was no breeze, and the white-hot noon sun beat down on my face. But I couldn't go below deck. I couldn't leave the mermaid. She floated behind the glass, her long tail drooping. When she saw me, she pressed her hands and face to the glass and cooed sadly. I waved to her through the glass. She cooed and hummed in her low voice, trying to communicate with me. I listened, trying to understand. Are you hungry? I asked her. She stared at me blankly. Are you hungry? I repeated, rubbing my stomach. Go like this. I nodded my head up and down. For yes. Do this for no. I shook my head back and forth. I stopped and waited to see what she'd do. She nodded her head yes. Yes? I said. You are hungry? She shook her head no. No, you're not hungry. She nodded her head yes. Then she shook her head no again. She's just copying me, I thought. She doesn't really understand. I took a step back and studied her in the tank. She's young, I thought. She's a lot like me. That means she must be hungry. And she probably likes to eat what I like, right? Maybe. It was worth a try. I hurried down to the galley. I pulled open a cupboard and took out a package of chocolate chip cookies. Okay, it's not exactly seafood, I thought. But who wouldn't like chocolate chip cookies? I grabbed a few cookies and stuffed the package back in the cupboard. Alexander came through on his way up to the deck. He was carrying some equipment in his arms. Getting a snack? He asked me. For the mermaid, I told him. Do you think she'll like them? He shrugged his broad shoulders and said, Who knows? He followed me out on deck, carrying the equipment. What's all that stuff? I asked him. I thought I could run a few tests on the mermaid to see what we can find out about her, said Alexander. But go ahead and feed her first. Okay, I said. Here goes. I held a cookie up to the glass. The mermaid stared at it. I could see that she didn't know what it was. I said, patting my stomach. Yummy. The mermaid patted her tummy, imitating me. She stared out at me blankly with those star-green eyes. Alexander reached up and unlatched the screen top. I handed him the cookie and he dropped it into the tank. The mermaid watched it falling toward her through the water. She made no attempt to grab it. By the time it reached her, it was all soggy. It fell apart in the tank. Yuck, I said. Even I wouldn't eat it now. The mermaid pushed the soggy cookie pieces away. Maybe Dr. D will have something she likes when he gets back, said Alexander. I hope so, I said. Alexander began to set up his equipment. He put a thermometer inside the tank and some long white plastic tubes. Oh man, Alexander mumbled, shaking his head. I forgot my notebook. He hurried back down to the lab. I watched the mermaid float sadly in her tank, with all the tubes coming out of it. She reminded me of the fish down in the lab. No, I thought. She's not a fish. She shouldn't be treated this way. I remembered how she had fought the shark. She could have been killed, I thought. Easily. But she fought the shark anyway, just to help me. The mermaid cooed. Then I saw her wipe away the tears that had begun to run down her face. She's crying again, I thought, feeling guilty and miserable. She's pleading with me. I put my face against the glass, as close to hers as I could get it. I've got to help her, I thought. I put a finger to my lips. Shh, I whispered. Stay quiet. I have to work quickly. I knew I was about to do something that would make Dr. D very angry. My uncle would probably never forgive me. But I didn't care. I was going to do what I thought was right. I was going to set the mermaid free. Chapter 17. My hand trembled as I reached up to unlatch the screen at the top of the tank. The tank was taller than I was. I wasn't quite sure how I'd get the mermaid out of there, but I had to find a way. As I struggled to pull the screen off, the mermaid began to squeal. Ee! Ee! Shh! Don't make any noise, I warned her. Then I felt a hand grab me by the arm. I gasped, startled. A deep voice asked, What are you doing? I turned around to see Alexander standing behind me. I stepped away from the tank and he let go of my arm. Billy, what were you doing? He asked again. I was going to let her go, I cried. Alexander, you can't keep her in there. Look how unhappy she is. We both stared at the mermaid, who had slumped to the bottom of the tank again. I think she knew that I had tried to help her, and that I had been stopped. I caught the sadness on Alexander's face. I could tell he felt sorry for her, but he had a job to do. He turned to me and put an arm around my shoulders. Billy, you've got to understand how important this mermaid is to your uncle, he said. He's worked his whole life for a discovery like this. It would break his heart if he let her go. He slowly led me away from the tank. I turned back to look at the mermaid again. But what about her heart? I asked. I think it's breaking her heart to be stuck in that fish tank. Alexander sighed. It's not ideal, I know that, but it's only temporary. Soon she'll have plenty of room to swim and play in. Sure, I thought bitterly. As an exhibit at the zoo with millions of people gawking at her every day. Alexander removed his arm from around my shoulders and rubbed his chin. Your uncle is a very caring man, Billy, he said. He'll do his best to make sure the mermaid has everything she needs. but it's his duty to study her. The things he can learn from her could help people understand the oceans better and take better care of them. That's important, right? I guess so, I said. I knew Alexander had a good point. I loved Dr. D, and I didn't want to spoil his big discovery. But still, the mermaid shouldn't have to suffer for science, I thought. Come on, Billy, Alexander said, leading me below deck. I promised I'd show you how the sonar probes work, didn't I? Let's go down to the lab and I'll give you a demonstration. As we started to climb down, I took one last glance back at the mermaid. She was still slumped forlornly at the bottom of the tank. Her head was lowered, her blonde hair floating limply above it like seaweed. The sonar probes weren't as interesting as I thought they'd be. All they did was beep whenever the Cassandra was in danger of running ashore. I guess Alexander could tell my mind was not on the solar probes. Want some lunch? He asked me. Uh-oh. Lunch. I was hungry, but not for spicy chicken salad. I hesitated. Well, I had a big breakfast. I'll whip up something special, Alexander offered. We can have a picnic up on deck with the mermaid. Come on. What could I do? I followed him to the galley. He opened the small refrigerator and pulled out a bowl. This has been marinating all morning, he said. I looked into the bowl. It was full of thin strips of something white and rubbery looking. They floated in an oily, dark gray liquid. Whatever it was, I knew I couldn't eat it. It's marinated squid, said Alexander. I added some squid ink for extra flavor. That's what makes it gray. Yum, I said, rolling my eyes. I haven't had squid ink in days. Don't be so sarcastic. You might be surprised, Alexander replied. He handed me the bowl. Take this up on deck. I'll bring some bread and iced tea. I carried the bowl of squid up and set it down near the mermaid's tank. How are you doing, mermaid? I asked her. She flipped her tail a little. Then she opened and closed her mouth, as if she were chewing. Hey, I said, you are hungry, aren't you? She kept making that chewing motion. I glanced down at the bowl of squid. Who knows, I thought. This might be just what she'd like. I stood on a rail and unlatched the top of the tank. Then I dropped in a piece of the rubbery squid. The mermaid leaped toward it and caught it in her mouth. She chewed and smiled. She liked it. I gave her some more. She ate it. I rubbed my stomach. Do you like it? I asked her. I nodded yes. She smiled again. Then she nodded yes. She understood me. What are you doing, Billy? Alexander asked. He had come up on deck carrying 2 plates and a loaf of bread. Alexander, look, I cried. We communicated. I dropped another piece of squid into the tank. She ate it. Then she nodded yes. That means she likes it, I said. Wow, murmured Alexander. He put down the plates and picked up his notebook. He scribbled some notes. Isn't that way cool? I demanded. I'm a scientist too, aren't I, Alexander? He nodded but kept writing. I mean, I'm the first person on Earth to communicate with a mermaid, right? I insisted. If she stays with us long enough, you might just be able to talk to her in sign language, he said. Just think of the things we could learn. He spoke aloud as he wrote. Likes to eat squid. Then he put down his pencil and said, Hey, wait, that's our lunch. Uh-oh, I thought. I hope his feelings aren't hurt. He looked at me. He looked at the bowl. He looked at the mermaid. Then he started laughing. At least somebody around here likes my cooking, he exclaimed. About an hour later, Dr. D returned with the groceries and supplies. Luckily, he had bought plenty of seafood in Santa Anita. We fed some of it to the mermaid for supper. While she ate, Dr. D checked the readings on the meters Alexander had set up in the tank. Interesting, Dr. D commented. She sends out sonar signals through the water, just as whales do. What does that mean? Asked Sheena. It means there are probably other mermaids like her, said Dr. D. She must be trying to contact them with underwater signals. Poor mermaid, I thought. She She's calling to her friends. She wants to be rescued. I went to my cabin after supper and stared out of the little porthole. An orange sun sank slowly into the purple horizon. A wide carpet of gold light shimmered in the rolling ocean waters. A cool breeze blew in through the porthole. I watched the sun drop into the ocean. The sky immediately darkened, as if someone had turned off a lamp. The mermaid is up there all alone, I thought. She must be so frightened. A prisoner. Trapped in a fish tank in the dark. The door to my cabin suddenly burst open. Sheena bounded in, panting, her eyes wide. "Sheena!" I scolded angrily. "How many times do I have to tell you to knock first?" She ignored me. "But Billy!" she gasped. "She's escaped! The mermaid's escaped!" Deep Trouble by R.L. Stein. Chapter 18. I leaped off my bed, my heart pounding. "She's not there!" Sheena cried. "She's not in her tank!" I darted out of the cabin, up the hatch, and out on deck. Part of me hoped she really had escaped to freedom, but part of me wished she could stay forever, and make my uncle the most famous scientist in the world, and me the most famous nephew of a scientist. Please let her be okay, I thought. Up on deck, my eyes adjusted to the evening darkness. Tiny lights glowed all around the edge of the boat. I squinted across the deck at the giant fish tank. I ran so fast I nearly toppled overboard. Sheena was right behind me. "Hey!" I cried out when I saw the mermaid floating listlessly in the water, her green tail shimmering faintly in the fading light. It took me a few seconds to realize that Sheena was laughing. "Gotcha!" she shouted gleefully. "Gotcha again, Billy!" I groaned loud and long. Another one of Sheena's stupid tricks. "Good one, Sheena," I said bitterly. "Very clever. You're just mad because I fooled you again. You're so easy to trick." The mermaid raised her eyes to me, and a faint smile formed on her pale lips. "Laurel, Laurel," she cooed at me. "She really is pretty," Sheena said. The mermaid is hoping I'll let her go now, I thought. Maybe I should. Sheena could help me, I decided. It would be easier with two of us. But would my sister cooperate? "Sheena," I began. I heard footsteps behind us. "Hey, kids." It was Dr. D. "Hey, it's almost bedtime," he called. "Ready to go below?" "We never go to bed this early at home," Sheena whined. "Maybe not, but I bet you don't get up so early at home either, do you?" Sheena shook her head. We all stood at the tank and watched the mermaid in silence. She gave her tail a little flick and settled back down at the bottom of the tank. "Don't worry about her," Dr. D said. "I'll check on her during the night to make sure she's all right." The mermaid pressed her tiny hands against the glass wall of the tank. Her eyes pleaded with us to set her free. "She'll feel better when she gets to the Marina Zoo," Dr. D said. "They're building a special lagoon just for her, with a reef and everything. It'll be exactly like the lagoon off Alondra. She'll be free to swim and play. She'll feel at home." I hope so, I thought. But I didn't feel so sure. The Cassandra rocked gently on the waves that night, but I couldn't fall asleep. I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling. A pale beam of moonlight fell through the porthole and across my face. I couldn't stop thinking about the mermaid. I tried to imagine what it would feel like to be trapped in a glass tank for a whole day. It probably wouldn't be that different from being trapped in this tiny cabin, I thought, glancing around. My cabin was about as big as a closet. It would be terrible, I thought, fiddling with the collar of my pajama top. I pushed open the porthole to let in more air. The fish tank might not even be the worst of it, I figured. I know Dr. D cares about the mermaid. I know he'd never hurt her. But what will happen to her when the zoo people take her away? Who will look out for her? Sure, they're building a fancy fake lagoon, but it won't be the same as the real lagoon. And there will be people around, staring at her all the time. They'll probably expect her to perform tricks or something. Maybe jump through hoops like a trained seal. They'll probably put her in TV commercials, too. In TV shows and movies. She'll be a prisoner. A lonely prisoner for the rest of her life. This is all my fault. How could I let this happen? I have to do something, I decided. I can't let them take her. Just then I thought I heard something. A low hum. I lay very still and listened. At first I thought it was the mermaid, but I quickly realized it was a motor. I heard it chugging softly from a distance, but slowly the sound moved closer. A boat. I sat up and peered out of the porthole. A large boat pulled quietly up beside the Cassandra. Who was it? The zoo people? In the middle of the night? No, it wasn't the same boat. This boat was much bigger. As I peered out the small porthole, I saw two dark figures quietly slip on board the Cassandra. Then two more. My heart began to race. Who were these people, I wondered? What are they doing? What should I do? Should I sneak up and spy on them? What if they see me? Then I heard more strange noises. A thud. A muffled cry of pain. It came from the deck. The deck, where the mermaid was trapped helplessly in her tank. Oh no, I thought, feeling a chill of panic. They're hurting the mermaid. Chapter 19. I charged up to the deck. Sheena ran right behind me. Stumbling over a tow rope, I grabbed the rail to steady myself. Then I darted blindly to the fish tank. The mermaid huddled at the bottom of the tank, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. I saw 4 men standing tensely near the tank. All 4 were dressed in black. They had black masks pulled over their faces. One of the men held a small club in his hand, and a body lay sprawled on the deck, face down. Dr. D. Sheena screamed and ran to our uncle. She knelt beside him. They hit him on the head, she cried. They knocked him out. I gasped. Who are you? I demanded. What are you doing on our boat? The 4 men ignored me. 2 of them unfolded a heavy rope net and spread it over the fish tank. Then they let it fall into the tank, draping it over the mermaid. Stop it, I yelled. What are you doing? Be quiet, kid, the man with the club muttered. He raised the club menacingly. I watched helplessly as they tightened the net around the mermaid. They were kidnapping her. Ee! She squealed in terror and started to thrash her arms, struggling to free herself from the heavy net. Stop it! Leave her alone, I cried. One of the men gave a low laugh. The other 3 still ignored me. Sheena was bent over Dr. D, frantically trying to wake him up. I ran to the hatch and shouted down into the cabin. Alexander! Alexander, help! Alexander was big and strong, maybe strong enough to stop these men. I ran back to the tank. The mermaid was trapped in the net. All 4 men worked to lift her out of the tank. She squirmed and fought with all her strength. Eee! She screamed. The high-pitched squeal hurt my ears. Can't you get her to shut up? One of the men cried angrily. Just load her on board, the one with the club replied sharply. Stop, I yelled. You can't do that. Then I totally lost it. Without thinking, I dove toward the 4 of them. I don't know what I planned to do. I just knew I had to stop them. One of them pushed me away easily with one hand. Stay away or you'll get hurt, he muttered. Let her go. Let the mermaid go, I cried frantically. Forget about the mermaid, said the man. You'll never see her again. I grabbed the rail. My heart was pounding in my chest. I gasped for breath. I couldn't stand the mermaid's terrified screams. I couldn't let them take her. Not without a fight. She had saved my life once. Now it was my turn to save hers. But what could I do? They had lifted the mermaid out of the tank. 3 men had her in a net. She squirmed and thrashed like crazy, splashing water all over the deck. I'll tackle them, I thought. I'll knock them over. Then I'll push the mermaid into the ocean and she can swim away to safety. Lowering my head like a football player, I took a deep breath and ran right at them. Chapter 20. Billy, stop! Sheena screamed. I crashed into one of the men holding the net, butting him hard in the stomach with my head. To my dismay, the man hardly moved. He grabbed me with his free hand, lifted me up off the deck, and heaved me into the fish tank. I splashed into the warm water and came up, choking and sputtering. Through the glass, I watched the men toss the mermaid aboard their boat. They were getting away. I tried to scramble out of the tank, but it was too tall. I kept slipping down the wet glass, unable to reach the top. I knew there was only one person who could stop the masked men now. Alexander. Where was he? Hadn't he heard all the noise? Alexander! I shouted as loud as I could, but my voice was muffled by the glass walls of the tank. Then finally he appeared on the deck. I saw his big blonde head and muscular body moving toward me. At last! Alexander! I cried, scrambling to stay afloat in the tank. Stop them! I could hear the motor of the other boat begin to rumble. One by one, the masked men lowered themselves off of our boat. 3 of them had left the Cassandra. Only one remained on deck. Through the glass, I watched Alexander run up to him and grab his shoulder. Yes, I thought. Get him, Alexander. Get him. I'd never seen Alexander hit anyone before, but I know he could do it if he had to. But Alexander didn't hit the masked man. Instead, he asked, "Is the mermaid safely on board?" The masked man nodded. "Good," Alexander replied. "And have you got the money for me?" "Got it." "All right," Alexander murmured. "Let's get out of here." Deep Trouble by R.L. Stein. Chapter 21. I nearly choked on a mouthful of water. I just couldn't believe that Alexander was working with the masked men. He had seemed like such a good guy. But I knew now that he had arranged the whole thing. He had to be the one who had told them the mermaid was on board our boat. "Alexander!" I cried. "How could you?" He stared at me through the glass. "Hey, Billy, it's just business," he said with a shrug. "The zoo is going to pay $1 million for the mermaid, but my new bosses will pay $20 million. A thin smile crossed his face. "You know arithmetic, Billy. Which would you choose?" "You rat!" I shouted. I wanted to punch him. I struggled to get out of the tank. All I managed to do was splash a lot and get water up my nose. Alexander followed the masked men to his boat. I pounded helplessly on the glass tank. Then I saw Sheena stand up. Lowering my gaze to the deck, I saw that Dr. D was moving. Alexander didn't seem to notice. He stepped over Dr. D's body. He didn't even care that Dr. D could have been hurt badly. I watched my uncle reach up and grab Alexander by the ankle. Whoa! Alexander tripped and fell hard onto his elbows and knees. Sheena screamed and backed up to the rail. Maybe there's still hope, I thought, my heart beating faster. Maybe they won't get away after all. Alexander sat up, dazed, rubbing one elbow. "Get them!" he shouted down to the masked men. 2 of the men climbed back aboard the Cassandra and grabbed Dr. D. Sheena ran at them, flailing at them with her puny little fists. Of course, that didn't do any good. The 3rd masked man grabbed her arms and pinned them back behind her. "Kick him, Sheena!" I yelled through the glass. She tried to kick the man who held her, but he just tightened his grip. She couldn't move. "Let them go!" I screamed desperately. "What should we do with them?" asked one of the men. "Whatever you do, do it quickly," said Alexander. "We've got to get out of here." The man who held Sheena glanced in at me. I was frantically treading water, trying to stay above the surface. "They might call the police, or the Coast Guard," he said, frowning. "We'd better kill them." "Throw them all in the tank," suggested